The night had a way of breathing against the windows of Lila Mae Carter's cabin, soft, unsettled, like an animal pacing the edges of her loneliness. Wind carried grit across the prairie like passing ghosts, whispering over the dry grass and rattling the loose boards of the roof. Inside, the lantern's flame bowed and swayed with each restless gust, throwing long, nervous shadows across the wooden walls. This was the hour where most hearts quieted, where families curled together, where laughter dimmed into sleep. But Lila lived outside such circles. Her nights were thin, stretched tight as old cloth, silent as the pages of a Bible left open too long. Folks in town said she was made of glass, too breakable, too timid, too easy to overlook. Some claimed grief had hollowed her out after her young husband died. Others whispered worse, as people do when they can't understand a gentle soul. But tonight, even loneliness seemed to tremble, as if sensing something drawing near. Lila sat by the hearth, her hands cupped around a chipped mug of chamomile tea. The heat warmed her palms, but not the ache that lived deeper, an ache made of months of rejection, the sting of careless words from neighbors who looked through her rather than at her. Her cabin felt too large for just one heartbeat, too quiet for a woman who had once known laughter echoing across these walls. Then it came. 3 knocks. Not loud. Not hurried. 3 slow, deliberate taps, as though someone weighed each strike of their knuckles as carefully as a prayer. Lila froze. Her breath tangled in her throat. No one knocked on her door after sundown. No one visited her at all unless they needed something, flour, stitching, or a place to leave their pity. She set the mug down, its ceramic clink far too loud for the stillness. The knocks came again, each one steady, patient, unafraid. She rose, smoothing her dress though no one could see her tremble. The cold floorboards creaked under her feet as she approached the door. Her hand hovered above the iron latch. The wind outside moaned softly, tugging at the edges of the world. "Who's there?" she called, her voice smaller than she intended. A silence. A shift of weight. Then a voice, deep, low, shaped by mountains and loss. "Shelter for a child." The words pressed through the cracks of the door like smoke. Lila's heart stumbled. She pulled the door open just an inch, lantern gold spilling onto the porch. There he stood, an Apache warrior, tall as a shadow cast by fire, his features carved with wind and hardship. His braids were dark ribbons down his back, tied with worn leather strips. Dust coated his clothes. But it was his eyes, the color of fading dusk, that stilled her breath. They were fierce, yes, but also tired. Tired in a way she understood too well. At his side, leaning against him, was a small boy. Barely 8. Wrapped in a thin blanket. His cheeks flushed with fever, his eyelids drooping like wilted petals. The boy's small hand clutched the warrior's tunic, knuckles white with fear. Lila opened the door a little wider. "What happened?" she whispered. The warrior answered with a slow, respectful bow of his head. "Name is Taza Blackwind. My son, Coda, fell ill. We've ridden far. Storm coming behind us." He glanced toward the prairie, as if danger lurked somewhere behind the night. Lila's fingers tightened on the doorframe. Her mind spun. Every warning the townsfolk had ever thrown at her rushed forward. "Don't trust Apache. Don't let strangers in. You're too soft, Lila. Too easy to fool." The sheriff's stern reminders. Elias Harper's cutting remarks. The memory of her husband's last night alive, helping a traveler no one else would, only for tragedy to follow. She swallowed hard. I shouldn't," she began, her voice cracking like the wood at her feet. The child whimpered, a tiny sound, barely more than breath. It was enough to tilt something in her chest. Taza's expression didn't plead. He held himself with the dignity of a man who asked for nothing he hadn't earned. "Only till sunrise," he said softly. "For the boy." The wind howled across the plains, pushing dust in swirling spirals around them. Lila looked at the child, his lashes stuck to his cheeks with fever sweat. Her fear cracked open like a seed split by heat. A small, trembling act of courage bloomed. "Come in," she whispered. Taza blinked, surprised, but he lifted Coda gently, as though carrying a fragile bundle of dawn. Lila stepped aside, closing the door behind them. The world outside vanished. The storm inside remained. The warmth of the hearth pressed against Taza's shoulders as he knelt to wrap his son more securely. Lila found herself watching the way he moved, slow, careful, protective. He spoke to the boy in Apache, voice soft as a lullaby. The language curled through the air, turning the cabin into a place that felt unexpectedly alive. Lila hurried to prepare broth, her hands fumbling with pots that suddenly weighed twice as much. She could feel Taza's presence behind her, not threatening, but grounding, like a tall cedar standing watch. When she handed the bowl to him, their fingers brushed. Her breath stuttered. Taza's gaze caught hers for a heartbeat too long. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded, unable to speak. The fire crackled gently as Koda slept curled against his father's side. Lila sat across the room, pretending to mend a ripped sleeve. Truly, she was listening to the soft breaths of the child, watching Taza's silhouette flicker in the firelight. She realized how empty her cabin had been until tonight, how hollow the silence felt before another heartbeat joined it. Distantly, outside, a horse's neigh cut through the wind. Taza stiffened. Lila's sewing needle paused midair. But the prairie went quiet again. "You're safe here," she whispered before she could stop herself. Taza looked at her, really looked at her, with a softness that unsettled her more than the storm. "We will not bring trouble to your door," he murmured. And yet, even as he said it, Lila sensed the truth. Trouble had already found its way across the plains, and it was coming for all of them. Still, for this night, this fragile, firelit moment, Lila felt something else. Not fear, not regret, but the faint beginning of connection, born in a quiet cabin beneath a dusty moon. Morning drifted into Lila Mae Carter's cabin like a shy guest, soft-footed, pale gold, brushing against the worn wood and settling gently on Taza and Koda as they slept near the dying fire. For a moment, Lila simply stood there, hand resting on the edge of the table, watching them. There was something unbearably tender in the sight of the warrior's arm curled protectively around his son. It softened the sharp planes of his face, turned his stillness into something almost fragile. Koda's small breaths puffed against his father's chest, each exhale a thread tying them together. Lila had not woken to another presence in her home since her husband's last dawn, a memory that floated now like a ghost behind her shoulder, neither welcome nor fully gone. The kettle hissed. Birds stirred restlessly outside. The wind had calmed, though unease still clung to the edges of the world. She prepared coffee in silence, hoping the clinking of tin cups would not wake them. But Taza stirred anyway. Warriors, she supposed, did not sleep deeply even in safety. When his eyes opened, they were softer than the night before. "You kept watch alone?" he asked. Lila shook her head. "The fire kept us all." Taza studied her with a depth that made her feel seen in a way that was new and disarming, like a hand pressed gently against an old bruise. She looked away, busying herself pouring coffee. Koda woke next, eyes bleary, small voice croaking, "Papa, my head." Taza kneeling beside him, touching his forehead with the back of a calloused hand, was a gesture so gentle it made Lila's throat tighten. "Fever's breaking," she said softly. "He just needs rest." Taza nodded, gratitude flickering like warm embers behind his gaze. "You have a healer's kindness. Lila Mae." Her breath hitched at the sound of her name in his quiet voice, like the syllables had been polished smooth by reverence. The wound Taza tried to hide. Later that morning, as she swept the hearth, Lila noticed Taza move too suddenly and wince. His hand pressed his ribs, jaw tightening. She hesitated, then approached him, fingers brushing lightly against his arm. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he said, shifting away, breath catching. "Taza," she whispered, surprising even herself with the firmness in her tone. "Let me see." He froze. Pride flickered, but so did pain. After a long moment, he lifted his shirt. Lila sucked in a breath. His side was mottled with purple and blue, swelling with the kind of bruise only a hard blow, or many, could make. "Who did this?" she murmured, fingertips trembling as she reached for a clean cloth. "Men who wanted something that wasn't theirs," he said. "They chased us. I kept them from my boy, but—" His breath shuddered as she dabbed a salve over the bruise. Lila worked carefully, aware of the warmth of his skin, the strength beneath her fingers. Taza's breath grew shallow, not from pain alone, she sensed, but from the closeness. This moment felt like a match struck in a quiet room, brief but bright. Town eyes, sharp as knives. By midday, trouble found her doorstep in boots and dust. Elias Harper rode up with 2 other ranchers, the kind of men whose arrogance rode ahead of them like a banner. Lila stepped outside, heart thumping, hands wiping nervously on her apron. "Well, mornin', Lila," Elias drawled, eyes cold despite his smile. "Heard you had some visitors last night." Her stomach dropped. "We just came to make sure you're safe," he continued, glancing over her shoulder toward the cabin window where a faint movement, maybe Taza's shadow, could be seen. "I'm fine," Lila replied, too quickly. Elias's lips curled. "Folks worry about you. Alone out here. Easy for trouble to find." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Letting Apache inside? That's a mistake that could cost you." Heat climbed her neck, shame, fear, anger all tangled. "I decide who enters my home," she whispered. Elias laughed, loud and cutting. "You decide? Lila May, you barely stand up to a stiff wind." The other men snickered. Lila's throat burned. "We'll be back later," Elias said, eyes glinting with greed she didn't yet understand. "Just in case you need rescuing." They rode off, dust swallowing their tracks. When Lila shut the door, her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the latch. Taza stood silently at the table, his expression unreadable. But something had hardened in his gaze. "You hide because of me," he said quietly. "No," Lila whispered. "I hide because of them." For a long moment, neither spoke. But the air felt charged, fragile, heated, threaded with a quiet understanding. Coda's small, honest truth. Later, as the sun dipped low and turned the horizon into painted fire, Coda approached her where she stood by the window. "Miss Lila," he murmured. She knelt so their eyes met. "Yes, little one. Are you scared of us?" The question struck her deeply. She touched his cheek, brushing a loose strand of hair from his forehead. "No," she said softly. "I'm scared of the world, but not of you." Coda nodded, leaning into her hand with the trust of a child finally safe. Behind them, Taza watched, his face unreadable, but his eyes warm with something that might have been hope. Acts of grace in the quiet hours. As dusk settled, Taza stepped outside and without a word began repairing her broken fence, splintered slats and sagging posts becoming straight under his steady hands. Lila watched from the porch, the soft amber light of evening catching strands of his hair, turning him into a silhouette carved from dusk. Later, she placed a wool blanket over his shoulders where he sat beside the hearth. He didn't turn, but she felt his breath deepen, felt the silent thank you. These gestures, small, wordless, wove a thread between them. A thread neither dared name. A glimpse of a hidden fortune. That night, as the fire crackled low, Lila saw Taza unwrap a small leather bundle. She hadn't meant to look, but the glint of something golden caught the firelight. Carved gold pieces. Apache symbols etched into them. She turned away instantly, heart thudding, but Taza saw her gaze. "This is what they chased us for," he said softly. "My brother's legacy. Not meant for greed. Meant for protection." Lila nodded, her mind spinning, fear and compassion tangling under her ribs. Outside, somewhere in the dark, a horse neighed. A warning carried across the plains. The storm was moving closer. And so were the men who wanted the gold. Dawn had not yet broken, only a silvery hint of it, a whisper rising behind the hills, when Lila May Carter woke to the restless murmuring of the wind. It crawled around her cabin edges like a warning. Shadows trembled across the walls, uneasy and long. Taza was already awake. He stood by the window, body outlined by the pale ghost of morning, every muscle coiled in quiet readiness. Coda slept behind him, curled beneath the blanket Lila had tucked around him the night before. "They're close," Taza murmured. Lila felt the chill before she heard the sound. The thud of hoofbeats rolling like distant thunder across the plains. Not many. 3, maybe 4. Men who rode with purpose. Her breath trembled. She pressed a palm to her chest, feeling her heartbeat twist painfully. "Taza," she whispered, "you don't have to face them alone." But the warrior shook his head slowly. "My fight should not become yours." "You brought your child into my home," she said, voice barely above a breath. "That makes all of this mine too." A flicker of emotion passed across his face. Gratitude, sorrow, something deeper and unnamed. But he didn't argue again. Outside, the hoofbeats stopped. Silence pressed against the cabin walls. Then, a hard knock. Not like the 3 gentle taps of the night he arrived. This one carried the weight of entitlement. Of men who never asked, only took. Elias Harper's voice slithered through the doorframe. "Morning, Lila. We know he's in there. Best step aside before things get ugly." Lila's stomach dropped. Behind the arrogance, she heard something uglier, glee. He wanted the gold. Wanted the power. Wanted her fear. Taza's hand brushed hers lightly, an unspoken plea for her to hide, to let him surrender. But Lila shook her head, stepping toward the door as if pulled by something stronger than fear. A fragile sort of courage. A courage she didn't know she'd been nursing all along. The act of becoming brave. She opened the door with her lantern in hand. The early dawn painted her in soft gray light, hair tousled, eyes wide but steady. Elias Harper sat proudly on his horse, 2 men flanking him, guns slung casually, like they expected no trouble at all. "Well now," Elias said, smirking, "look at you trying to stand tall." Lila swallowed, voice trembling but unbroken. "You need to leave." The men laughed. Elias leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Hand over the Apache. And the gold he stole. We'll pretend you had no part in it." Lila's breath shook. Fear clawed inside her ribs, but she didn't step aside. "I won't," she whispered. Taza stepped behind her then, silent as dusk, but his presence radiated like heat from a forge. Elias's amusement died instantly. "That's far enough," Elias snapped. "You surrender now, Black Wind, and maybe we let the girl keep her home." Lila flinched at the word girl, how small he wanted her to feel. But fear was no longer steering her. She glanced back at Taza. His jaw was clenched, but his eyes held something soft, pain that she was doing this, but also awe that she stood at all. "Let me end this," he murmured. "No," she whispered. "Let me decide something for once." The quiet climax. Taza stepped forward, kneeling, not in surrender, but in defiance. He unwrapped the leather bundle and poured the gold pieces into the dust between them. Gentle clinks, like falling stars striking earth. Elias's eyes gleamed with greed. "This belonged to my brother," Taza said, voice low but unwavering. "Meant to protect families of our tribe. If gold is worth more to you than a child's safety, take it." Elias bent down, giddy with triumph. His hand reached for the nearest gold piece. In that moment, everything inside Lila snapped. The town's whispers, the months of shame, every time she'd been told she was too soft, too fragile, too foolish. Her hand tightened around the lantern. She swung her arm. The lantern shattered on a rock between Taza and the men, glass exploding like tiny sparks of rebellion. Flames whooshed into life, flaring tall enough to force the horses back, the men stumbling in shock. Not a weapon. Not an attack. Just fire. A barrier born of courage. Taza stared at her with stunned reverence. Elias cursed, scrambling to steady his horse. "You insane woman! You'll pay for—" But the flames rose, crackling with fierce, hungry light, separating Lila and Taza from the men who would destroy them. Smoke billowed upward, masking the gold, the dust, the fear. A shot rang out, but it struck only soil. Then, another voice. Firm. Gravelly. Unamused. "Put the guns down." Sheriff Boone Riker rode into view, drawn by smoke and cowardice. His face hardened when he saw Elias and his men with their weapons drawn. "What are you idiots doing? She's defended her property. You 3. You're under arrest for attempted robbery and assault." Elias sputtered. "But Sheriff, she's helping them, she—" Riker cut him off sharply. "All I see are you fools causing trouble again." The men were disarmed and taken away. Their curses faded into the brightening horizon. The soft aftermath. When the prairie fell quiet again, Taza turned to Lila. The rising sun bathed them both in gold, the kind no man could steal. "You risked your life," he murmured. You risked yours first, she whispered back. Coda peeked from the doorway, sleepy and frightened. Lila ran to him, crouching to pull him close. He buried his face in her shoulder, small arms hugging her neck with trust that felt like absolution. Taza watched them, something achingly tender settling in his expression. We must leave soon, he said softly. Not because of danger, but because our path continues elsewhere. Lila nodded, though her heart felt like a door swinging in the wind. He stepped closer, close enough that she felt the warmth of him. From his palm, he offered a single gold piece. Not payment, he said. A promise. That we will return, if there is light waiting for us. Lila closed his fingers gently around it instead. The light will be here. Their eyes held, quiet, lingering, full of everything words could not express. A final reflection to the reader. If you're still here, if some part of you walked beside Lila through all this dust and danger, then remember this. Sometimes the fortune we discover is not gold hidden in a warrior's pouch, but the courage hidden inside ourselves. The kind we only find when someone knocks on our door and asks for mercy. The kind that shows us who we truly are. The world will try to make you small. It will whisper that you are fragile, foolish, afraid. But there will come a moment, quiet, trembling, when you choose to stand tall instead. And in that moment, you become the fire that keeps someone else alive.